Every war begins by breaking something whole. Before the ruins, there is always a life. And before the silence, there is always laughter. Danuta was born in 1933 in a village called Olszewnica, just outside Warsaw. She came into the world in the lull between wars, into a Poland that was fragile, reborn, hopeful. Her family had always lived off the land. The soil knew their hands, and the seasons carried their names. Her father, Feliks, was more than a farmer. He had ambition. In the 1920s, he built homes with his own hands. 3 houses, sturdy and admired, that gave him not just money, but confidence. He left behind the uncertainty of the fields and moved his family to Warsaw, where he built something new, a tailoring shop. The shop became the heartbeat of the family. The clatter of scissors, the hum of Singer sewing machines, the smell of fresh fabric. These were the sounds of security. Warsaw in the late 1930s bustled with trams and street vendors, with a middle class rising and children playing along cobblestones. For a time, Feliks's family lived among them as one of the fortunate. By the eve of war, Feliks had employees of his own. The family moved from the apartment above the shop to a spacious suburban home. They were proud, they were safe, and no one yet knew that safety in Poland was an illusion. The storm came in September 1939, and from that moment, life was divided into before and after. The German invasion tore through Poland. Warsaw was bombed relentlessly. Fires swallowed entire blocks. Feliks's shop, his pride, his livelihood, went up in flames. Some whispered arson. Others said it was simply war. The truth mattered little. Everything he had built was gone. Desperation turned him practical. He pulled what valuables he could from the wreckage, the Singer machines, pieces of gold, heirlooms, and buried them back in Olszewnica. He sent his wife and children away from the city, back to the village of their birth. But Warsaw haunted him. He tried to rebuild, running the business from their suburban home, even as the city grew darker under occupation. By 1941, Warsaw was no longer livable. The streets were filled with checkpoints, patrols, and whispers of disappearances. Feliks joined his family in Olszewnica. There was no choice. The years between 1941 and 1944 were marked by tension. Every day was a question. Who will be taken? Who will vanish? By the summer of 1944, the family's fragile peace ended. It was night when the soldiers came, boots against cobblestone, German commands slicing the air, torches burning in the distance. They rounded up entire families from Olszewnica and neighboring villages. Danuta, 11 years old, walked with her parents and brother in a line, driven forward by mounted soldiers. The destination was Beniaminowo, a ghetto, a camp, a place where freedom went to die. For most, the march to a camp was a straight line to suffering. But Feliks was not most men, and war is decided sometimes by moments the world never sees. He studied the soldiers, their bodies slumped, their eyes heavy as dusk fell. He pushed his family to the back of the line, whispering the plan. And then, in the fading light, he gave the order, roll. One by one, they slipped into a roadside ditch, silent, trembling, their breaths shallow as boots crunched past above them. Danuta pressed her face into the dirt, her heart hammering. If one soldier turned, if one glance fell their way, they would be finished. But no glance came. The line moved on, and the ditch became salvation. They stumbled across the countryside until they found a barn. For 2 months, that barn was their prison and their refuge. They survived on scraps, on silence, on fear. Every creak of the wood above them felt like death waiting. When the farm's owners returned, fate tilted in their favor. These were not informants, they were patriots, tied to the Warsaw Uprising. They allowed the family to stay hidden, sometimes feeding them, sometimes bringing whispers of the outside world. It was through them that Danuta's family learned the news. The uprising had been crushed. Warsaw was ash. Hope was buried under rubble. And then came the Russians. For many Poles, their arrival was not liberation, but another occupation. Feliks's wife went back to Olszewnica first, believing a woman's presence would draw less suspicion. What she found was ruin. The farm stripped bare. The buried treasure, the heirlooms, the machines, the gold, all stolen. Their suburban home in Warsaw had been claimed by a lodger and legitimized by the new communist regime. Their shop dismantled. Their life erased. What war does not burn, it steals. What it does not steal, it buries. For survivors, victory is measured not in triumph, but in breath. Feliks returned with his family to a land that no longer recognized them. They had survived, but survival had cost everything. Feliks, once a vigorous man, now looked decades older. His son, still a boy, carried the eyes of someone aged by hunger and fear. Danuta remembered him as if he had aged 10 years in 4. She said the same of her father. War bent them, carved them, aged them. They returned to the farm, trying to stitch together what was left. Danuta was later sent back into Warsaw, working as a clerk in a city rebuilt on ruins. But it was never the same city. It was a place of absence, homes stolen, shops erased, streets lined with ghosts. The family never regained what it had lost. The suburban home, the shop, the wealth, the machines, gone. But they had something rarer. Survival. History records battles. It records treaties. But it does not always record the quiet endurance of one family. The nights spent hiding in barns, the ditches where breaths were held, the farm stripped of memory. These are the stories that vanish if not told. They are not stories of generals. They are stories of survival. Danuta's memory of war was not of heroism, but of hunger, not of victory, but of waiting in silence for footsteps to pass. And yet, through her story, one truth survives. Even when the world burns, families hold on. In Olszewnica, the fields still grow wheat. In Warsaw, the trams still rattle down the streets. Time moves forward. But in the wires and trenches of memory, there remain voices, like Danuta's. A child of war who survived the firestorm. A family who endured when everything else was taken. They survived. But survival was never the same as living.